Good morning. This is the first ever talkback panel with four people on the screen, and that's two more than I've ever had on a talkback screen before. But we are joined here by Paul Farhi, who we met because he did a story for the Wall Street Journal about frustrated, crazy sports fans on TV. You all know Tim Hanlon from the Verteri Group, and he's representing the issue about what the business of sports television is, and John Giegengack, who's going to tell us more about what consumers are thinking about this. And somewhere in there, we have to deal with um, why do people buy a streaming service to get one season of, for example, baseball? And do they, John, then disconnect that streaming service as soon as the season is over, and kind of what's involved with all that? But anyway, Paul, we're going to start with you. No, I named the Wall Street Journal, but you write for everybody. You're now freelancing, and we see you all over the place. So briefly, tell us about yourself.
Yes, hi. Well, I'm a freelance writer. I was a longtime reporter for the Washington Post, covered a number of things over 30 plus years. Took a buyout at the end of 2023 and have written for a number of publications, including the Wall Street Journal, as you mentioned, my old stomping grounds, the Post, Daily Beast, Vanity Fair, Columbia Journalism Review, etc. I am a big sports fan. Also very interested in the news media. So these kind of things came together when the Journal called me and asked me to write about this topic, this particular topic. So it
How
was
how did they happen
harmonic
to call
convergence.
you? I'm intrigued by
Yeah,
why
I'd like to
some
know.
editor thought this was important.
Yeah, I'd like to know myself. I'm very gratified. I I'm looking for the trifecta, which is to write in my lifetime for the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, and the New York Times. I haven't written for the New York Times. I pitched them on a couple of things, gotten close, but not quite there. But I was very happy when the Wall Street Journal called me because I have read the Journal for literally decades, and they were doing this business of sports special report, and they had an idea, which is always great. I have to tell you, when an editor has an idea, because it alleviates you having to think up the idea yourself and pitch
I
it to
get it.
them. So very happy to do it. And it was a really great, smooth collaboration. Those guys are pros, and it was a really fine experience. And I thought the story came out really nice. It looked really good too on the page,
The
the web
graphic
page.
was good, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I will share a secret with you. All of my audience knows that I have a subscription to the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times that allows me to share articles. And
Oh,
so your article I shared on my feed, and it was
thank you.
the most popular journal story all year. That beat out everything about Paramount, everything about everybody else. Yours was the most popular, dude.
Your viewers have good taste. That's all I can say.
All right, John Giegengack. You
Yeah.
read the story, and he quoted some folks who were inordinately frustrated with not finding my team, how much I got to spend. How big is that, and how big an issue is that for the industry now?
Uh, I mean, I don't know if it overshadows the success that sports teams are having now, but under this veneer of rising sports rights fees and making a killing, we are seeing sort of a microcosm of what we saw over the past 6 or 7 years with TV in general, which is that people are excited about having all of these options. But you're going from an environment where everybody knew where to look for the football game on Sunday, almost like, more than convenience, really sort of a cultural ritual. And now that's much more diffused. And in some cases, there's games that are exclusively only on streaming. So you have to go get that subscription uh, if you want to watch the game. And that's frustrating for people. It's frustrating when you talk about scripted television, trying to find the show you heard about, the show that you want to watch. But with sports, it's a lot more pronounced. If you can't find, I don't know, Yellowstone, there's probably some other buzzy original maybe not Murdering Cowboys, but some other original show you can find that'll sort of scratch that itch. But if you want to watch the Eagles play the Giants, there's no substitute for that. And so any friction that gets in the way of you locating that and watching it creates more frustration and creates it very quickly. And I thought in Paul's article there was, I think the risk for the leagues is, Paul, in your article you talked about one person that was used to watching through a regional sports network, and then they cut the cord. And I think they were more of a casual fan, but rather than go try to seek out and jump through all the hoops required, they just sort of lost interest and they just stopped watching. And I think that is maybe a bigger risk in this era of how much content there is to choose from, bigger than people perceive. And I don't think it would hit huge leagues like the NFL first, but it's important to remember that we all thought cable TV was impregnable until just a few years ago, and that suddenly wasn't. And I think the biggest risk for the leagues is not to have those casual fans, that sort of conduit of casual fans who can become interested and work their way up that continuum to where they're avid fans that watch every week or every game.
Tim Hanlon, John mentioned Yellowstone. There might be fans out there of Kevin Costner or somebody else on the show, but they ain't nothing compared to fans of Shohei Ohtani. Okay. Fans, I think, are the most important commodity, wrong word for it, but the most important factor in the value of sports. Are the teams and leagues, are we screwing up the relationship with fans?
Of course, but the fans aren't necessarily as supreme as they used to be, right? In a world where sponsorship and private equity backed investments and the asset class now that sports teams have become, right? It's really about multiple revenue streams, and the consumer is part of some of them, but not necessarily fully or directly. I think all the stuff that both Paul and John have kind of set the table for, and you as well, of course, is I think it's only all this disruption and fragmentation has been only exacerbated by the very rapid collapse. I mean, a little bit by a little bit, and then all at once. And that's what's going on in the cable industry, right? The dissolving seemingly overnight of the regional sports network model, right? And that is the lion's share of non-direct fan revenue, if you will, right? It's an indirect sort of source of revenue, but it's been an outsized one for many sports teams for at least the last 10, 20 years, right? And all of a sudden that gets shaken to its core. And in a bunch of cases, not all, it's been made into rubble, right? So in many respects, you can't necessarily blame Major League Baseball and NHL and NBA in particular for rushing to find anyone, streamers or otherwise, to fill in that gap most quickly. Is it the same amount of money that can be replaced? No, but it is clearly it's a challenge that has only been made worse, I guess, not only the collapse of RSNs, but the greed, shall we say, or the short mentality of these leagues to take checks from ever thinner slices of rights, right? So the NFL is supreme and has gotten away with it by carving out or creating even a new game or two or whatever for Netflix or whatever, right? But the other three major leagues, if you will, are so hugely dependent on that local inventory because they have so many more games to fill during the course of a season than the NFL does. Those local rights, right? If there's not a high dollar payment for RSN, it shakes free how the teams can pay these exorbitant fees for their players and stay competitive and stuff. So the fan is just caught in the middle, and they got to figure out where they all are and sort of stitch together what a season looks like. And that's increasingly difficult, but I don't think it's going to last for much longer. We can talk about why.
Okay, Paul, you talked to fans, I'm sure, that you didn't put in the story. Did you find people who just said, to hell with it, I'm not even going to bother?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think to hell with it is exactly the sentiment.
Sorry. But it's too much trouble.
But close enough, which is I'm irritated, I'm annoyed, and you're testing me here. And one of the sentiments that I thought was very interesting was a guy who said, what about young people? I'm middle-aged or I'm older. I have some money. I can afford, streaming. I can afford cable. I can afford all the various options. But young people don't. And if you're going to develop the next generation or the next two generations of fans, what about them? Well, dad and mom might carry them for a while, but you make it so expensive that you price out the people who are your future. And I thought that was a very interesting sentiment. The other thing I just want to say is the NBA did something very interesting this last season, this last negotiation, which is they went sort of back to the future and they struck a deal with ABC, Disney, to put a lot of games back on broadcast television, good old broadcast television, where this all started, which was a movement away from the regional sports networks and away from streaming and even cable, because the NBA had most of their games on ESPN. So, the NBA is betting we can have a literally broadcast model that brings in lots of fans, then we'll sell them the expensive packages.
All right, John Giegengack. I have read your material enough to know that Gen Z is, in point of fact, the future of our business. Right now, if I'm somebody my age, I'm likely to hire a 14-year-old kid to help me find the stuff on TV. Are we walking away, pushing away from the Gen Z audience that we're going to be completely dependent on in 10 years?
Well, they do have a lot less tolerance for friction in how they find things to watch, because they're not comparing your TV app to other TV apps. They're comparing your TV app to TikTok or to YouTube.
Yep.
Where there's really no discovery involved at all. You just start watching, and then the algorithm kind of steers you to the stuff that you're going to enjoy. One thing I think that we are maybe doing is, and I don't even think it's necessarily a bad thing, but when we ask people, has it gotten easier or harder to find sports over the last year or last 2 years? The people that are their favorite sports are one of like the big three or four, they're the most likely to say that it's gotten more difficult. But if you're a fan of F1 or the UFC or women's soccer, those smaller sports, you're a lot more likely to say that it's gotten easier. And I think one really interesting thing that's happening is that there are now all of these really small sports that were not big enough to survive in a live TV world, where you have to have, the Venn diagram of all the people that are interested and all the people that are available Saturday at 1 PM. There has to be a big overlap of those two. Now with streaming, you can those people can way to that content whenever they want to. And there are a lot of sports I think that have tremendous capacity for growth, and that at the moment aren't nearly as expensive, orders of magnitude less than the really big sports, but that a media partner can get involved with and help them grow and ride on the way up. And I think that I think young people especially are a lot more open-minded about the kinds of entertainment they pursue. They're not necessarily interested in watching what everybody else is watching. They want to see sort of what's hyper-personalized for me and my interests. And I think that's a huge, huge opportunity for a lot of smaller sports. Just as on the scripted side of television, we saw, huge opportunities for anime or, British series or other kinds of smaller content that couldn't become huge in a linear TV world, but they can when everybody has their own sort of little micro fiefdom of stuff that they're interested in.
All right, Tim Hanlon, you told us that this can be solved. You've got less than a minute. How do we solve?
Well, I just want to just say to tag on to John's piece there. Kids discover this stuff via social media, right? So that's actually their discovery mechanism, right? So they may see a clip or a play or whatever, and then decide that they want to go more deep into the live thing, which is a complete whole, distinction and difference. But look, I think you're seeing that all of these leagues now trying to create these sort of local hubs, and this is actually a big sticking point in the upcoming Major League Baseball labor negotiations, but certainly for the NBA and the NHL as well, where there's a coordination in sight that would maybe centralize all the production and the outsourcing of the talent and that kind of stuff, and then allow the product to essentially find local points of presence, whether it's broadcast or streaming or otherwise, right? And I think that's all those leagues are starting to recognize that we have to bring this back together, or at least harmonize it so it becomes easier and in a hubbed kind of way locally. And I think that's what's going to play out the next couple of years. We'll see how the economics catch up, but the leagues are paying attention and clearly time is a wasting because the consumers are not about to sit around and wait until they figure it out.
I got that. Well, listen, that takes us out of time. So Tim Hanlon, Paul Farhi, John Giegengack, thank you for your time, guys. This is going to air on, looking at my calendar, July 23rd, which means I'm going to turn it around faster than I've ever turned anything around before. Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Take care.